Those who were here last time will remember the goals, objectives, and methods exercise we went through. Each group selected their top goals, objectives, and methods for the future of Butler. The top goal ended up being to establish Butler as a regional destination for economic and social activities. The top method was to provide spaces for organized recreation and entertainment. And the top methods were to implement a tax raise and to establish community centers. Like I said earlier, we took this workshop and recreated it in the high school. The students that attended were a lot of help. They chose from the exact same options as the All-City workshop did. They actually ended up choosing the exact same top goal of to establish Butler as a regional destination for economic and social activities. Their top objective was the same, to provide spaces for organized recreation and entertainment. But their top methods were to establish restaurants and entertainment venues downtown and to develop spaces for youth and young adult entertainment. As a team, we looked at the selected goals, objectives, and methods, as they are all very important. And then these here are the composite graphs from both meetings. Unfortunately, it's kind of hard to read. We interpreted all this information and from it devised an overall mission statement to achieve Butler's goals and objectives. The mission statement is to reinvent the city of Butler's electric city identity through aspects of socialization, active living, and sustainable practices. Something during this presentation to keep in mind is that a given and all-inclusive imperative that we have noticed that must be incorporated into Butler's changes must be sustainability. Through our research, we have become increasingly convinced that sustainability is becoming ever more necessary, especially to small cities, as the price of gas grows. As Butler progresses, sustainable practices must be a part of that development. From this mission statement, we began to devise physical, executable methods to achieve the mission. These physical methods can be seen here on the plan of Butler, and we'll go into much more detail later in the presentation. Through doing this, we identified 4 key issues that must be a part of Butler's future growth and change. Identity, which is the fostering of an identity of what Butler is and what the city stands for. Socialization, or the betterment of the social and community interactions. Heart of the city, which is the enhancement of the city center as a place of commerce, residence, and entertainment. And lastly, active living, or providing for an opportunity for citizens to live a more active lifestyle. You will notice that many strategies we present will fall under more than one issue. This is because the process is very holistic. All these issues, as they are addressed, will help to bring in more people, jobs, and visitors. Businesses look at these issues also when they're looking at a place to move to. They're very interested in that when looking to open a business. We're going to go through these issues in depth. We'll show you imagery showing our intent. These images are not of Butler, but of places and ideas we have studied. At the end, we'll go through the comprehensive plan in more detail, and we'll discuss actual implementation of these ideas for Butler. So moving forward into identity, which is the fostering of an identity of what Butler is and what the city stands for. This contains multiple components, including signage and beautification. These images show what Fort Scott Street or other streets in Butler could possibly become. Signage could be applied to more than just signs by the road, but also to constructions such as footbridges or overpasses that go over the road, that create more of a gateway. Beautification could happen through landscaping, streetscaping, and other design guidelines. Another idea to help create an identity of Butler is to develop a transportation hub, making use of the rail line that could potentially in the future become a passenger rail rekindles Butler's progressive thinking that it had when it was the first city with electric lights west of the Mississippi River. This could serve as a hub for more than just rail transport, but any and all forms of transportation, such as trolleys, bikes, and shared vehicles. The top image being a much larger transportation hub and the bottom image being one that would be more of the scale for Butler. A third component to creating Butler's identity is that of green technology. Just as Butler was the electric city back in the day, that progressiveness can brand the city through new technologies that work toward clean energy future. Electric cars with charging stations, wind turbines, and the already planned solar farm would give Butler that electric identity again. Next, we come to socialization, the betterment of the social and community interactions. We have come up with a variety of methods aimed at increasing community interaction. First, the idea of having 2 community centers. One would be located close to the hospital and high school. It would be aimed at recreation, rehabilitation, and sports. The other, located close to the square, would be centered on meetings, gatherings, festivals, and other events. Having two centers would activate 2 different parts of Butler in 2 very different ways. A second aspect to socialization is density. We're looking to slowly raise the density of Butler to help create more social connections. Raising the physical closeness of people actually ends up bringing them closer together as a community. Density can be raised by offering a variety of housing methods. Having everything from single family to townhouses to multifamily buildings in the same area allows people to choose the housing type that is right for them. This ends up raising the diversity of the community by allowing each individual to find their own unique niche inside of it. Another component is that of public green spaces and community gardens. Having spaces where Butler can gather together to enjoy nature will enhance the quality of the community. Creating places where people can grow things as a community also helps to create social connections that otherwise might not have been made. This also allows communities to take ownership of the public green spaces. To revitalize the heart of the city, the first step is getting people there. Starting with making Fort Scott a more attractive street will make it more compelling for visitors to drive further from 71 towards the square. Creating a clear path and views from Fort Scott to the square will also make it clear where the downtown is. In conjunction with the transportation hub mentioned earlier, a public transit system would have a stop on the square. This would bring people directly from Fort Scott and Orange area to the square. The second step to revitalizing the square is the reactivation of it. City squares used to be the source of life and activity, bringing a farmers market, festivals, and events, and having the means to facilitate those events can return life to the square. A final step to revitalizing the square is unifying it into one. Remember, these are not images of Butler, but of another small city that we have studied. Systematically improving the facades, streets, landscaping, and surrounding area will unify the square into one unit within the community. This will make the square more of a destination for visitors and the community alike to go to and spend time in. Our final issue is active living, providing for an opportunity for citizens to live a more active lifestyle. Many pieces work together to create more active communities. One piece has to do with housing again. Placing the housing within easy reach of public green spaces encourages residents to spend more time active and in the outdoors. Another component to active living is the creation of walkable communities. These communities are places where people are both close enough to desirable destinations that they can walk there and that they are comfortable to do so. This means the streets have to be designed for not only cars, but bikes, pedestrians, and public transportation. The streets must also be clean, safe, and have amenities for the alternatives to cars. One very important piece is that of mixed land use. Putting commercial next to residential, next to entertainment, or even stacking it all together like a sandwich, makes it more likely that you can get to where you want to without a car. These ideas also aid in giving each neighborhood within Butler its own sense of place and identity. So again, our 4 key issues were identity, socialization, heart of the city, and active living. This is the comprehensive plan again that I showed earlier. We're going to go through piece by piece and point out and describe what exactly we're proposing. So starting with the highway entry at Fort Scott, we're looking at adding green spaces around the entry and gateway entries to it. More signage, more attractive landscaping and streetscaping. Hopefully that will pull more people off the highway and into Butler in general. Working our way down Fort Scott Street, street beautification, making Fort Scott itself a more desirable street to drive down, a street where people want to drive further because it's a beautiful place and it's something that they want to see. Also, adding commercial, entertainment, and dining options up and down Fort Scott Street will help to encourage people to stop, stay a while, and experience parts of Butler. At the intersection of Fort Scott and Orange, we're proposing a transit hub. This is where it's a really great place where it's the intersection of two large streets and where the rail line can be easily accessed at the same time. So as the rail possibly shifts towards commuter traffic, you can make use of that. It will also serve as a hub for a public transit system, bike trails, walking trails, and possibly even shared vehicles. This public transit system would connect to the downtown area and most importantly to the square. So talking about the square and entry into the square. Continuing the language of the square, the physical language of the cobblestone streets and how the buildings are composed. Continuing that down towards Fort Scott Street, lighting the area with more lights, adding some soft-scaped areas, some greenery, and providing views from Fort Scott to the square will encourage more people to come into the square. Once they're in the square, renovating the facades and making them more uniform, more cohesive and combined, taking that into one language that makes the square one unit. Implementing some parking improvements, which include taking out the center lane, or the lane closest to the center of the square, expanding that green space on the square and opening it up for activities such as a farmer's market possibly. Just next to the square is the Square Community Center. This would be just to the west of the square. It would be the community center that hosts meetings, it hosts events, helps facilitate festivals, carnivals, anything of the sort. It'd be a place for people to gather to get together and host their meetings. We're working with a corridor from what would be the new community center up to the old high school. So cleaning up that corridor between the two to make more of a connection between them and turning it into cluster neighborhoods or parks areas. And then at the old high school, one option for the old high school is to renovate that into housing, such as senior housing. Another option is to remove the old high school and replace that space and the space taken up by the police building by public green space or public garden. Just to the north and west of that old high school area has been located as an area for possible refurbished or retrofitted self-sustaining community. A self-sustaining community is centered around walkability and the aspects of active living. It's a very social community with much higher density than is currently there, and hopefully with much more to do. We've also looked at creating a new construction of self-sustaining community. The area just north of Highway H, almost straight north of here, you can see the area on the small figure ground there, has been located as a possible place to build an entirely new part of Butler that would be built following the aspects of active living and walkability. I mentioned the more recreation-based community center earlier, down on the south side. This could house a workout facility, indoor pool, small cafe, and much more. It'd be able to service the hospital for rehabilitation and give the high school improved facilities for their sports. This would also allow the school to host events such as swim meets that would otherwise have to be driven to out of town. And the final component is that of community gardens and green spaces. All around Butler, new small parks and green spaces will allow people to have someplace close to home to gather and for children to play at. The gardens would allow the community to come together to take part in growing and nurturing something as a group.